Imagine an invisible danger that does not arise from a lack of intelligence, but from a collective, subtle, and powerful mental contamination. It is something that transforms even the most enlightened people into unwitting agents of a destructive system. Consider the following situation: a renowned scientist spreading dangerous falsehoods, a respected teacher encouraging aggressive discourse, a devoted parent exposing their own children to risk, not out of malice, but due to a unique kind of ignorance. Not the kind we associate with a lack of education or intellect, but a collective blindness that silently distorts our view of the world. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian who stood up to the Nazi regime, clearly perceived this phenomenon. He did not witness monsters, but ordinary citizens, co-workers, and even religious leaders becoming efficient tools of cruelty due to a critical lack of discernment. The most disturbing thing is the realization that this phenomenon is occurring right now, with people close to us, with ourselves. It is a disturbing realization, and essential to preserving our mental autonomy against those who profit from our silent conformity. We usually think of foolishness as an obvious lack of intellectual capacity, a simplified caricature. However, the real danger is much less noticeable, a social element, not just an individual one, deeply embedded in systems and customs accepted without reflection. This type of collective blindness does not stem from personal intellectual incapacity, but is instilled by culture, education, and institutions that determine what to think, how to act, and which norms to follow without question. Thus, the individual's capacity for reflection is replaced by invisible norms that dominate everyday decisions and behaviors. What becomes habitual is accepted as ethical. Consensus is understood as absolute truth. Most alarmingly, such blindness has a specific function: to maintain order, ensure stability, and preserve dominant interests. Questioning individuals pose a threat. Critical thinking compromises the system. Therefore, passive people become essential. They consume, vote, share, and revolt within the imposed limits, creating citizens perfectly adjusted to the interests of the ruling power, whether democratic, authoritarian, or corporate. Imagine someone convinced that thinking means having a ready opinion, absorbed almost automatically through television or social media, like an invisible transmission that dominates their ideas. This phenomenon creates a society full of individuals who consider themselves critical and conscious, but in practice are merely unconscious interpreters of a script they never wrote. Here, the lack of critical awareness is not an exception, but the fundamental structure. Any attempt to escape this cycle is immediately seen as arrogance, conspiracy, or exaggerated radicalism. And it is precisely in this dynamic that the real risk lies. When this lack of discernment ceases to be recognized as an error and comes to be considered a virtue. When questioning becomes aggression and reflection is confused with arrogant superiority. The result is an entire generation with a wealth of information, but incapable of genuine and independent thought. In 1943, imprisoned by the Nazis, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran theologian, produced reflections that are remarkably relevant today. Arrested on charges of conspiring against Hitler, Bonhoeffer no longer saw explicit cruelty as the main threat, but rather ignorance taking on the active role of a morally accepted force. Bonhoeffer witnessed ordinary, educated, and seemingly kind people unwittingly becoming accomplices to heinous crimes. They did not act out of deliberate cruelty, but because they had completely lost the ability to discern. They followed orders, trusted blindly, repeated speeches, and paradoxically, when someone dared to question, it was these ordinary citizens who were the first to point fingers and condemn. He wrote clearly, "Ignorance is a much more dangerous adversary to good than explicit evil. For while evil can be denounced and fought against this structural ignorance, we are powerless. Bonhoeffer's diagnosis was not exaggerated, but an accurate description of what was happening around him. Teachers supported fascist ideas, doctors carried out inhumane experiments, ordinary citizens handed over their Jewish neighbors to the authorities. Not out of evil intent, but because they were unwitting pawns of an authoritarian regime. They were not directly murderers, they just accepted the murderous logic of those who actually were. The most disturbing thing is that these people were proud of it, because in the prevailing collective logic they were acting correctly. The ignorance described by Bonhoeffer was not a lack of intelligence. It was the voluntary and quiet submission of the intellect to authority, an ideal condition for sustaining any totalitarian regime. Herein lies the core of the theory. Ignorance as a moral choice, as a conscious abdication of the illusory security offered by dominant narratives, creating intelligent and sensitive individuals who are easily manipulated by devastating systems. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was executed by the Nazi regime shortly before the end of the world conflict. But the essence of his thinking transcended that dark period and remains incredibly relevant today. The phenomenon he identified is not limited to that era. It is present now, camouflaged in comfortable discourses, automatically copied ideas and certainties that no one dares to question. The central question posed by Bonhoeffer did not revolve around the goodness or evil of people. What he questioned was the very ability to reflect freely. His perception was not only historical criticism, but a provocative view that once assimilated, irrevocably changes our understanding of the world. For Bonhoeffer, the great risk was not a lack of intelligence or a deficit of information. Rather, it was a profound moral problem involving the silent surrender of the mind to external stimuli disguised as one's own decisions. Academic degrees and unlimited access to information were irrelevant. The crucial point was an authentic willingness to doubt and reflect. This ability weakens when attracted by the comfort of social acceptance or the sense of security offered by structured systems. We renounce critical reflection. Especially in turbulent times when fear takes over, there is a natural tendency to seek refuge in promises of stability and order. In these circumstances, ordinary people give up questioning the current system. And it is precisely in this scenario that the perfect profile for authoritarian regimes is born. A citizen convinced that they are in control but unable to see that they serve unknown interests. Bonhoeffer realized that mental passivity is more than mere carelessness. It is active militancy. Those who give up intellectual autonomy not only accept imposed ideas but also defend them fervently. These individuals do not ask for proof. Authority is enough for them. Instead of questioning, they persecute those who dare to do so. And here lies the most worrying aspect. Intelligence is no guarantee against this type of mental domination. On the contrary, it can even facilitate this process. Educated, articulate, and socially prestigious people often use their eloquence and elaborate reasoning to validate ideas they have never analyzed in depth. This is the most dangerous face of this contemporary ignorance, an educated, admired, and apparently critical mindset, but one that ultimately does not think for itself. In this scenario, the individual merely reproduces what they hear. The stronger the repetition, the more convinced they become of their mental clarity. Bonhoeffer was right to fear this dynamic. It converts entire societies into vast territories of voluntary submission, where the few brave souls who dare to reflect are labeled as strange or dangerous, while those who follow without question become models of virtue. This is precisely the most disturbing aspect of his theory. It does not point the problem only at others, but forces us to look directly within ourselves. And today, Bonhoeffer's ethical and historical intuitions find solid confirmation in recent discoveries in psychology and neuroscience. In 1943, Bonhoeffer intuitively perceived what science now explains with frightening clarity. An emblematic example of this is the Dunning-Kruger effect. According to this theory, individuals who are less skilled in a particular subject are often overly confident in their opinions. Paradoxically, lack of knowledge does not raise doubts, but absolute certainties. The less aware they are of their limitations, the greater their willingness to defend extreme and radical ideas. This reality becomes even more apparent when we recall the research conducted by psychologist Solomon Asch in the 1950s. He clearly demonstrated how social pressure can lead individuals to deny clear evidence just to fit in with the group. In his classic experiment, participants were asked to identify a line that was the same length as another line shown as a reference, a seemingly easy task. However, everyone else in the room, who were accomplices of the researcher, gave clearly wrong answers, deliberately misleading the actual participant. Surprisingly, more than 70% of participants accepted the wrong answer at least once, clearly preferring to be wrong with the group than to be right alone. Solomon summed up this finding by stating that social pressure is so powerful that many prefer to be wrong with others than to be right alone. This research leads us to a disconcerting understanding. The fear of not being accepted, of appearing different or inadequate, often outweighs even the natural desire to defend the truth. The urge to belong, to not stand out from the majority, can lead intelligent and educated people to abandon their own thinking, disturbingly confirming Bonhoeffer's prophetic warning. Bonhoeffer did not fear common ignorance, but conscious and militant conformity. Added to this is the phenomenon of confirmation bias, which leads people to select and remember only what reinforces their beliefs, ignoring any counterpoint. Today, the internet amplifies this behavior to the extreme. Algorithms quickly learn what opinions we want to consume and provide exactly that, creating infinite mirrors that reflect only our certainties. Each click further deepens intellectual isolation, resulting in millions of individuals who are confident in their convictions, but unable to question them. More recently, neuroscientists have discovered that our brains interpret challenges to personal beliefs in the same way they experience physical pain. Literally, thinking differently is uncomfortable. This finding explains why so many prefer to remain within the predictable comfort of their opinions, rather than accept the effort and discomfort of true reflection. These scientific revelations justify Bonhoeffer's fear. The functional ignorance he described is predictable, exploitable, and profitable. Today, economic and political powers, technological platforms, and advertising campaigns consciously use this psychological vulnerability. The average citizen is not manipulated randomly. He is manipulated because his behavior is predictable. It is essential to understand that the necessary resistance is not against ignorance, but against the abandonment of autonomous thinking. Reflection is biologically costly, psychologically uncomfortable, and socially dangerous. That is why it is rare, challenging, but indispensable. A clear example of this phenomenon was the experiment conducted by Stanley Milgram in 1961. He wanted to understand how much ordinary individuals would obey orders that caused suffering to others. The results were shocking. 65% of participants agreed to apply potentially fatal electric shocks to strangers, simply because they received clear instructions from an authority figure. These individuals were not monsters or sadists. They were ordinary people who, even though distressed, yielded to authority. Milgram concluded that obedience removes people's moral responsibility for their own actions. They do not see themselves as perpetrators, but only as instruments of execution. This study proves Bonhoeffer's central argument, showing how ordinary citizens can inadvertently collaborate with atrocities by delegating their consciences to external authority. Not because they are evil, but simply because they have stopped thinking critically. Today, we no longer need explicit authoritarian regimes to promote functional ignorance. All it takes is technological seduction, empty entertainment, repetitive education, and a culture where disagreement is offensive. Every day, superficiality is applauded, and deep reflection is seen as elitism or arrogance. In this environment, the ideal individual is not the independent thinker, but the distracted consumer, the impulsive voter, the emotionally unstable citizen. After all, people like this are profitable and easy to guide. The most difficult and necessary question left by Bonhoeffer is disturbing. How many ideas you hold are truly your own? Questioning yourself has become a radical act because it involves going beyond ready-made opinions, dismantling certainties and embracing the anguish of questions without immediate answers. True thinking is dangerous because it threatens all easy narratives. You will be seen as arrogant, radical, or maladjusted for questioning consensus and breaking with the security of quick and comfortable answers. However, this is the only way to maintain your mental autonomy. Bonhoeffer realized while imprisoned that choosing to reflect was dangerous, but also that renouncing critical thinking was deadly. Today, this decision is more urgent than ever. Remaining lucid is an act of resistance and disobedience against a society that wants to turn consciousness into a marketable commodity. Thinking for yourself can bring loneliness and discomfort, but it guarantees something fundamental: freedom. Because the real danger is not in being different or unpopular, but in abdicating the right to think in order to live comfortably in a world that values functional ignorance. Knowing this is liberating, but it also comes at a high price. It is the inevitable price of lucidity.